During this offseason, we've been doing a little bit of a series looking at some teams and taking pulling back the top layer. We call it what's going on with. I think that's what we call it. Is that what
what's going on in? It's
what's
your damn
going on
catchphrase.
Yeah, he doesn't know. He doesn't know. By the way, MacMahon did a nice job calling back to that on NBA Today this week.
Well, I gotta give Shanae the primary credit for that. The assist. She's the one who she
That's
got
true. That's true.
The index fingers.
It was a good job by all three of you guys.
$15 each. You can send me on Venmo $15 each. I'm not even on Venmo. It's ridiculous. What's going on in Cleveland?
Ooh.
We thought we'd take a look at the Cavs. 44 wins last year, but did not make the playoffs. Double loss in the play-in tournament. Had some unfortunate luck with Colin Sexton, pretty much missed the entire season, had some other injuries, but a huge step forward for Darius Garland, who signed a max contract in the offseason. The Cavs were kind of holding cap space.
Not kind of holding cap space. They were saving a max cap slot for a certain guy from Northeast Ohio to see if he would decide to come back and play there for a third time. Like it's safe to say.
Last year during the All-Star break in Cleveland, All-Star weekend, LeBron gave this interview where he said, yeah, I can see myself playing Cleveland. He qualified it by saying, maybe it's a one day contract. But it was right after the Lakers didn't do anything at the trade deadline. And he was miffed, and it was like, what, and by the way, like the Cavs, no surprise, have not had a respectable is not a fair word. They haven't had a meaningful small forward since LeBron left now 5 years ago. So even with Darius Garland's, and they didn't quite have a max slot, but they could have gotten there. They were leaving a big chunk of space open. They can retire that because LeBron is going to be a Laker next year. So they need to look another direction for that. This is the final year of Kevin Love's giant contract, which at times was an albatross. Now I actually think they could trade it if they wanted to, depending on various factors. They have a whole bunch of like twos. They keep drafting twos. And they have an all-star point guard. And of course they have the rookie of the year runner-up and Evan Mobley, who I voted for Rookie of the Year, and I have a real exciting feel about his future. That said,
and an all-star center.
Jared Allen.
That's right.
He's under long-term contract. By the way, Garland and Allen both signed 5-year contracts with no player options, which in a place like Cleveland is big.
Big deal.
So the difficulty with the Cavs, by the way, I'm going to tell you some stuff about their schedule in a second, but the difficulty with the Cavs, MacMahon, is that even though they've got a lot going for them, they've got a young team, I'm not sure how many teams they're going to be able to jump over in the Eastern Conference. The East is really intense ahead of them, and I'm not so sure they've gotten appreciably better enough to make a move.
Well, I think the question is, how much better can Evan Mobley get? And this guy is going to be one of the best defensive players in the league. Like he is very likely to be a defensive player of the year candidate for the next 12 years, whatever it might be.
For sure.
So the question is, can he become an all-star caliber offensive player? He was solid last year, averaged 15 points a game, shot it right above 50% from the floor. But especially with him playing the 4, how much can he grow as a three-point shooter? How much can he grow as a guy who, you can give the ball and he can create? He does have some passing ability. Can he become a primary offensive threat? I think Evan Mobley's development, or lack thereof, possibly as an offensive player, is ultimately going to determine the ceiling for this team.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, Jared Allen is a really good player. We also kind of know exactly what Jared Allen is, right? Like he's going to be the same guy he's going to be for a long time. Really durable, really good guy, great role player. I mean, he's an all-star, but like he fits his role.
He has some touch around the rim, but he's primarily a screen, roll, finish, rebound protect the rim, run kind of guy.
Yep. And for as good as Darius Garland is, and as much as he's improved, we've seen over time, if your top player is a 6 foot tall guard, it limits your ceiling. Like it's just very hard to win at the very highest levels if that's the guy you're going to with 2 minutes to go in the game. Like we've seen it over and over and over again. So Evan Mobley is the key to that. Like, can he continue to take the strides forward that he showed as a rookie and be a, perennial all-star player, as a hybrid forward center who can guard every position and become, like you said, MacMahon, really a hub of their offense. And then to me, the other question is the Cavs have thrown a lot of assets at the wing, right?
Yeah.
They still have the Colin Sexton situation unresolved. Maybe now that LeBron's off the table, maybe they come to some sort of agreement with him. Maybe they up their offer a little bit, try to get something done there. I didn't like the Karis LeVert deal at the time.
Well, LeVert is also extension eligible. It's possible they could extend.
They could extend him to.
They could. I don't think they're signing both of them long term.
Well, they could extend LeVert. No, go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
I didn't like giving up that first round pick for LeVert, but because the protections, if they don't take him a step forward this year, they might not end up giving.
That's true. They might be in the lottery again, and then they don't give up a pick at all. And then they drafted Isaac Okoro 5th a couple of years ago. They then seemed to pretty clearly draft over him, drafting Ochai Agbaji from Kansas, one of the older players in the draft, a guy who was the National Player of the Year at Kansas, a guy who in theory is going to step right in and play on the wing, because to Brian's point, that's been a black hole for them the past couple of years. So maybe they could try to address that next summer. But those are the two things. Can they find, some really consistent help on the wing? Because they had Lauri Markkanen starting at small forward all last year. You're not going to win big doing that. And can Evan Mobley continue to take steps forward?
There's some photos going around of Markkanen playing for the Finnish national team this summer, where he's like, I don't know if they're manipulated, but he's like super cut.
I mean, that's fine. He's not fast enough to play small forward.
Well, I know. I'm just saying, like, I don't know if, hashtag 15 pounds of muscle hit or 10 pounds of muscle hit Markkanen. I don't know, but it's.
Well, if you're going to have,
fans are excited about these photos.
If you're going to have Markkanen defending on the perimeter, it's a pretty good idea to have Mobley and Allen cleaning up a whole lot of messes behind him. And by the way, same thing with Darius Garland and point guard. Like those guys they can forgive a lot of defensive sins on the perimeter with those two guys behind.
But to your point, MacMahon, and for both of you guys, like, where do you see the Cavs right now in the East? Because to me, if you go through it, and right now you have to assume that the Nets are going to be basically what they were last year, at least as of now. Like, doesn't seem like these guys are getting traded. So, Boston, Toronto, Brooklyn,
hold on,
Philly.
So, I don't know about Toronto. They and Toronto are kind of neck and neck in my mind. They were neck and neck to get in to avoid the play-in this last year. Toronto ended up winning that and getting into.
Toronto had a lot. Toronto was never healthy all year. I think Toronto's a pretty clearly better team. Maybe you guys disagree. I think they're a level above.
Just hold up. They play on opening night. Low key, interesting opening night game in Toronto. I believe it's in Toronto.
Scotty Barnes v. Evan Mobley.
Yeah, 1 and 2 in the rookie of the year from last year. That game could end up being a factor because last year the Cavs Raptors came right down to the end on the tiebreaker, and just saying, what happens on opening night usually doesn't really make much of a difference in the NBA. That I circled that game and said, you know what, that could end up being an important game because I think the Raptors and Cavs are comparable.
So set Toronto aside. Philly, Boston, Brooklyn, all better. Milwaukee, Miami, better. Chicago, better.
Nah, I'm not committed to Chicago is better. I'm not committed.
So
you're saying better than Cleveland, right?
Yeah, I'm asking.
I'm not committing to Chicago there. I think that the Cavaliers are somewhere between 6 and 8, 5 and 8, somewhere in there. And again, so much of this.
It's just a fascinating group of teams. You got Atlanta, who just went on to get DeJounte Murray. Yeah. They're somewhere in that mix. You've got Toronto.
Atlanta finished behind them last year, beat them in the play-in, but finished behind them in the regular season.
But I would say they're a more talented team, though. But they're in that group. Toronto's in that group. Chicago's in that group. Cleveland's in that group. Like, those teams are all sort of 7 to 10 right now.
Yeah,
like
and Cleveland
that's an interesting mix.
Cleveland is I don't know how big of a step they make this. Obviously, they took a huge step last season, and I think that you can certainly say that the arrow was pointing up. I think if you talk about like 24 and under cores, that you have to put the Cavaliers in the conversation as the best young cores in the league. When you have two guys who are all-stars, and certainly I would bank on Mobley being a multi-time all-star. So three young all-star type of talents. I think getting Rubio back, we'll see. I don't know exactly where he is in terms of his recovery, but losing him certainly hurt last year. I think getting him back definitely helps. But again, I just go back to, it really does come down to Evan Mobley's development offensively. And I think when you look at young Anthony Davis, young Chris Bosh, young Kevin Garnett, and compare their rookie year numbers with Mobley's rookie year numbers. Now Mobley was 20 years old, but yeah, those are three guys who obviously developed into all-star go-to type of guys, plus what they did on the defensive end. And I think that's a reasonable hope for Mobley.
And I'm only pointing out those teams just as an example, like as an illustration of how, like, the East isn't what it used to be. Like normally you'd see a team with this Cavs group, like you'd think they're going to be 5 years ago, they'd be a top 5 team in the East.
They won 44 games. Most of the time in the last decade, 44 games, like the 5 seed.
Right.
It might have even been the 4 seed one of those years. All right. One thing before we move on, I wanted to point out about their schedule, because we'll talk about the schedule because it just came out yesterday. Ed Kupfer, who has been a longtime analyst of the Houston Rockets and sometimes tweets some of his stuff, his schedule analysis. I'm going to tell you something about the Cavs schedule that comes from the charts that Ed tweeted out. The Cavs are tied for having the most number of games when they have more rest days than their opponent. So they have the most they're tied with Sacramento and the Lakers for having the most favorable schedule where they're going to have a rest advantage on their opponent. They have the fewest back-to-backs in the league of any team. They're tied with a number of teams who have the same, but they've got the fewest. Last year, they had a bunch of back-to-backs extra because they had to give up their arena for some time to prep for the All-Star stuff. So they had cost them in back-to-backs. And they travel, and this has been the case for a long time, and it remains the case. They have the fewest miles traveled this year because Cleveland, when I covered the Cavs and then moved to Miami to cover the Heat, it was like a cold slap in the face about how much longer I spent on airplanes. Every flight, like half the teams in the NBA are like 90 minutes or less flight from Cleveland.
A lot of people feel sympathy whenever somebody makes that move from Cleveland to Miami.
Yeah, it was a lot longer flight down to South Florida in those winters.
I felt that covering the playoffs this year, like the Boston to Miami flights back and forth. That was like 3:15 every flight. Like it's a long way. Plus all the time
you waited on the tarmac to get out of the city. So anyway, the Cavs schedule, like everybody's always talking about, oh, the league screwed us, the league hates us, blah blah blah. That's been the case for 74 years. This the 76th year of the NBA, probably 75 years. Teams have been complaining about the schedule. So the Cavs actually, as you look at that, the schedule kind of could favor them. And if we're talking about them being a narrow difference between them maybe being the 8th seed or being the 6th seed, which is a huge difference, that schedule being favorable could end up being a factor. So I would just point that out as we talk about them. We'll see who's actually there in training camp, whether Colin Sexton is there. That'll be interesting to see whether he accepts the qualifying offer or he just flat doesn't sign it and waits for something to happen. Or they come to some terms. We'll see.
Thanks for watching ESPN on YouTube. For live streaming, sports, and premium content, subscribe to ESPN+.